So let's start there with China and the United States. It seems at least that equity traders took the developments of the past 3 days with a bit of optimism. They thought, okay, well, they didn't solve all the problems, but they seem to be moving forward. You think the relationship's broken, though? Can they fix it? Can they heal it?
They can't fix the relationship, but we can pretend for a while. And I'll say that certainly March 1, which, as you know, is the deadline imposed by President Trump, whereby you have to get some movement from the Chinese, or we're moving to 25% tariffs. That would have a very significant impact on the American and the Chinese markets and the global markets. But I'd be stunned if we actually were to proceed with that escalation towards a trade war. I think that both Trump and Xi Jinping are saying nice things about each other. They've been engaged in working towards something that will probably look like a framework agreement. It won't have a lot of details to it, but it will have a few headlines that Trump will be able to tout as saying, look at what I got from the Chinese. But that's very different from saying the relationship is moving forward in a sustainable direction. It's really not. At the same time that trade gets fixed, we're going to have exceptional challenges on intellectual property. On the technology side, larger numbers of U.S. and Western companies will say that their business models in China are increasingly unsustainable, and on the security side. And so over the course of the year, the U.S.-China relationship, the world's two largest economies, is indeed increasingly broken and is trending in a negative direction.
Now, one of the things I hear from people who watch the situation carefully is that China will play a much longer strategic game than the Americans will. It's just their nature to do so. Also, a difference of politics as well in the two countries. Is that a disadvantage for the United States, that China might just step back and say, well, we're in this for the long haul. We don't need a quick resolution?
I mean, certainly the fact that the Chinese president, Xi Jinping, last March effectively declared himself president for life by removing term limits. They don't have to worry about the next electoral cycle, while in the United States you've got a Congress that feels pretty broken, and, you know, sort of an 18-month-long multi-billion-dollar election every 2 years. Yeah, that's definitely an advantage for China. The disadvantages for China are that, number one, their system is still a lot less stable ultimately in the United States. So if you ask over 20 years which system is more likely to collapse, the U.S. or China, obviously that answer is China. And with Xi Jinping now as the guy in China, the concerns about what happens ultimately around succession are much more disconcerting, both for the markets globally and also for people living in China with a lot of wealth, wondering what they're going to do with it, what they're going to do with their kids.
What did you make of the arrest of Huawei's CFO on Canadian soil? Obviously, that's put us in the bad books with China, but we did do it at the behest of the Americans.
Yes, but also when Justin Trudeau talks about human rights, or talks about the Dalai Lama, talks about the Uyghurs and the re-education camps in the northwest of China, something that the U.S. used to do, but certainly under President Trump does not, that also puts the Canadians in the bad books with the Chinese. Look, at the end of the day, if you want to curry favor with China, criticizing them on human rights as a comparatively small country is not an easy thing to do. At the end of the day, though, Canada has a different system. Like all of the advanced industrial democracies, you have rule of law, you have an independent judiciary. It's not like the reason that you arrested the CFO of Huawei is because you were politically angry at China. Now, that's why 3 Canadians have been detained in return, but the Chinese don't have rule of law. Your relationship with Saudi Arabia is equally broken right now, again, because the Canadians are standing up for something that is increasingly hard to stand up for in the world as we know it today, but nonetheless does matter to the Canadian citizens and the Canadian system.
What does that do in the end, though, for Canada, as you said, a small trading nation, trying to curry favor with China, with other nations to sell our goods?
Well, if all you care about is money, then it hurts you. If, on the other hand, you think that the values that your country and your government has does bring some importance to the citizens of your country, then you'd want to weigh those two things. I mean, it's not like the Americans don't care about human rights. I mean, even under the Trump administration, you still see across the administration, for example, the money that's going to be sent with the Mexicans to Central America to try to make humanitarian aid situation improve. The U.S. still gives more than any other country in the world to the Syrians. So it's not as if we're all bloodless capitalists here. The Canadians happen to be a little less bloodless than the Americans are on this front. And I say this sitting here in Bloomberg, New York, of course.
I want to ask you my last question on China before we take a quick break and then get into some of your other issues, in the sense that I also hear that when it comes to America and China and the relationship, that America has a strong hand because China needs them more. They need to sell their stuff. I think I had one American fund manager tell me the one thing that we're really good at in the States is buying stuff from China.
Look, the Chinese economy is a lot smaller still than that of the United States. And ultimately, the Chinese are much more hurt by a trade war than the Americans are. On the other hand, they don't have democratic elections. They don't have to worry about elections at all. And their president's quite strong and actually quite popular, given 40 years of, on average, 8+% growth. So, you know, the Chinese also have staying power. It's very clear that both Trump and Xi Jinping, for very different reasons and very different systems, both want to avoid confrontation here. I mean, Trump doesn't want to see the American markets take more of a tumble under his presidency because of an escalatory trade war with the Chinese. The Chinese economy itself is slowing, and they're quite worried about getting into a fight with the United States. I think they both are looking to get to yes, but ultimately that getting to yes is going to feel a lot more like Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump with their summit in Singapore, their second summit in a place to be named later. It's not going to look like a breakthrough detente between the world's two largest economies.